And one thing I would say is if you have any game and you set the rules, if everybody is failing the game, the problem is not the players. The problem is the rules of the game.
Interesting. Okay.
And so when people say, oh, NERC should drop the hammer on everybody. Yes, we could. But the question is that, like, the worst NERC could do is to say, you know what, we'll revoke the license for this particular operator. But these are going concern. If we revoke the license, it doesn't mean that the customers in the place should not get service. And investors read market signals. Okay. So when the question an investor will be asking is, did the regulator give you a fair chance? Yeah. If they did not give you a fair chance by penalizing you for not, but after still not giving you the fair chance, do you think you're going to get new investors to come into the business?
It's the 18th of January, 2026. 22 players are on the field, one referee. The clock hits 90 minutes, a controversial call, and half the players were gone, but the clock kept ticking. The fans, bewildered. That's what regulating the Nigeria's electricity market feels like. It was designed with assumptions that are no longer true, and Dr. Yusuf Ali, vice chairman of NERC, is holding the rule book. He is the referee. He's trying to hold discos accountable when they can't deliver service. He's navigating a market where the rules keep changing faster than regulations can adapt. I am Emeka Opopara, and this is Connecting the Dots. Today, we're asking the question, can regulations keep up? Dr. Yusuf, how are you?
Well, thank you, Emeka. It's a pleasure to be here.
Grid collapses. That's what it's on everybody's mind in the Nigerian power sector. I think over the last last week at least, there were two. What's the main challenge there, and how do we address those?
Well, thank you. The issue of grid collapse is something that Nigeria has battled with for a very long time. And I think one of the things that is important to sort out is to explain what is a grid collapse. So basically, it's just a grid collapse is the instance where all the generating units on the network trip off. Okay. And typically, what causes this? The biggest cause of grid collapses in Nigeria today is there are instances where the load on the grid significantly exceeds the available generation. And as a result, you then have the different generating units tripping off to protect themselves.
Okay.
So in reality, people see the grid collapse as something that is, it's, I think it's misunderstood in the sense that basically what it means is all the generating units strip off. But then subsequently, I think usually within like 20 minutes or so of the collapse happening, the system operator tries to understand the root cause, isolate that segment of the network, and then they restart the system. And I think restoration lasts, but within 12 hours or so, the entire country is back on the grid. But not to sort of like belittle the point as well. I think the biggest cause of grid collapse in Nigeria today would be a few things. Number one is the sheer size of the grid means that we're very vulnerable.
The geographical size?
No, the capacity size. So it's very small.
Okay.
So actually, the bigger the grid, the more rigid it is. So if you have a 4,000 megawatt grid, or 5,000 as you currently operate, it means that once you lose one generating unit of about 200 megawatts, that is sufficiently large to displace the frequency profile of the network, thereby causing the grid to collapse. I think the one that happened on Friday, 2 Fridays ago now, I think there was an issue. So there was an act of vandalism on the two lines that evacuate power from Ughelli power plant in December, and that's why we struggled with generation volume in December, because up to like 500 megawatts out of that power plant.
Wait, so vandalism is still going on? People are still vandalizing lines?
It's incredible. In fact, I'll tell you, I think we had a meeting, there was an emergency meeting that the commission convened on, I think, Tuesday after the second collapse. And we're told that the night before, there was actually, a gunfire exchange between the security forces and the vandals in this Ughelli axis. And one of the vandals died. But so primarily what happened was, two lines evacuating power from Ughelli, both of them were vandalized at the same time. So in one of them, I think 5 towers were taken down.
So
The other one,
when they vandalize, are they what are they trying to steal? Wires or just being nuisance or just what's the call like? What's their
so I think it depends
goal?
on
Yeah,
it depends. So in the northeast, when we were suffering instances of vandalism in the northeast, the primary objective was just Boko Haram,
being
just
nuisance. Yeah.
disruptive. It was disruptive vandalism.
Hmm.
Think more in the south, the vandalism that you see is more economic vandalism. So people just go ahead, they sort of like throw like an ID or something, bring down the tower, and then steal components of it, the pylons. And so even I sort of like misunderstood or underestimated the work required. So basically, when you have to go and restore, what's it called, a pylon that is down, it's not just getting back on site and arranging things that you met there. There needs to be refabrication. Sometimes you need to refortify the, what's it called, the foundations and so on. So in this case, in Ugeli, 2 lines were taken down. There was emergency procurement done by TCN. A consultant moved to site. And I think the first of the 2 lines was reconnected by early January.
Okay.
So that line is the one that goes from Ugeli to Sapele. Now, what happened for the grid collapse of Friday was that I think there was a trip from the substation, from the power plant,
Itself. Yeah.
right, which affected the substation.
Okay.
Unfortunately, because that is the only substation that was evacuating power from Ugeli, right? One substation had a trip that automatically tripped.
The other one. Yeah.
So in the matter of seconds, we lost about 100 megawatts from one of the substations, one of the power plants locally, another 450 from Ugeli.
The grid's
So I
gonna
mean, the
go.
thing is,
Yeah.
if you have a grid that was doing 4,800 and you lose 600, I think that's about almost like how much? That's a
It's
1/8,
50%. Yeah.
right? That's 25%, almost like 12 or 5%.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's terminal for any grid. So back to the point, I think the first thing that is going to be required for us to stabilize the grid is if you can improve the volume of energy on the grid. It means that if you have more capacity on the grid, you can afford one or two, units going down. So, in fact, interestingly, I know you are aware that in November of last year, we were finally able to integrate with the West African
Power pool.
power
Yes.
pool,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Hmm.
During the 4 hours of interconnection, we had a loss of a generating unit, about 100 and something megawatts. Ordinarily, if we're not connected, that would have caused severe disturbance on the Nigerian grid. Because if you lose 1,000 out of 4,000, it's still, I mean, the frequency you're talking about, the range of tolerance of frequency is very small. I think it's like plus or minus 0.5%, right? So when you lose up to 1%, 2% capacity, it can be very disruptive. So during the interconnection, we lost a unit, but we didn't feel anything because the system of Nigeria was operating with the rigidity of the entire West African power pool. So think about maybe like almost like 10,000 megawatts.
So why don't we stay connected all the time?
So that leads to the second part I was going to go to, which is the SCADA system. So right now, I believe that in the West African power pool, the only two West African countries that are not connected to the pool, last I heard, is Nigeria and Niger. I don't know why Nigeria is not connected, but for
Because your
Nigeria,
grid is fantastic, right?
yeah. But in Nigeria, the problem that we have is that our frequency profile is too volatile, right? As I said earlier, I think it's 0.5% tolerance. So in normal steady state, the frequency is supposed to
50
maintain
hertz, right?
a range of, I think, from 49.75 to 50.25. That's the acceptable range. But because of our circumstances, we generally operate outside of that range. Now, considering the fact that Nigerian power system at about 5,000 megawatts accounts for more than half of the West African pool, it means that if you interconnect with, poor quality energy, it has a chance of affecting the entire network. So they're waiting for us to get our act together to ensure that our frequency stays within range for extended periods, and then we can integrate with the what's it called, West African power pool. But to do that, we need the SCADA system in place. I'm sure you're aware, under the World Bank NETA project, I think the target is to achieve 80% visibility and controllability by the end of the NETA program in June of 2026.
Awesome. So SCADA is actually on the system now, and it's just increasing the availability of it.
Yeah, so right now, as at the last meeting that we held to track the progress of the program, we're told that 39 out of the 180 substations have been integrated into the SCADA. But a majority of them are not connected yet. The big thing that's stopping them is we have network, what's it called? The fiber. So you require outage from the transmission network to actually install the fiber. So right now, as we speak, in Kano Disco, the Kano region of the country. So Kano region is a TCN. They have like some states under it. Kano, Sena, Jigawa, I think. Between now and I think March of 2026, over the weekends, from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., the power will be out because the contractor under the World Bank program is laying the fiber cable that is required to convey the data. So basically, SCADA is basically a bunch of data acquisition systems at the substations, then a whole lot of wires that transfer, but not electrical wires. What's it called? It's called OPGW, fiber that transmits information,
Okay.
right, to the national control center. And then you have the energy management system at the control center that uses real time, is able to see what is the requirement of the grid. You need to turn off power here, increase generation here, and so on and so on to balance the grid. So right now we have 39 substations connected. We've been assured by the contractor that all things being equal,
And by the grace of
by
God.
the grace of God. I mean, obviously, there's a bigger challenge, right? I mean, there's a part of the country, I don't want to get too specific, where they want to lay the fiber, but there's insecurity. So they're waiting to get approval from the security forces to be able to get the outage. Because obviously, you can't have people in the middle of the forest somewhere that are exposed. So, it's Nigeria is a complicated environment.
Very much
but
so.
we're hopeful that we'll get the SCADA in place. With the SCADA in place, we expect the quality of the power on the grid to grow up significantly. And that should hopefully without instances of like vandalism and so on that are exogenous to the system, the frequency of the system should be better managed, and hopefully we have less instances of grid disturbances.
Yeah. So to pick that up further, I think I was having some conversations with sector players around the grid collapse, and folks mentioned the SCADA system is one, but also and growing the capacity of the grid is two, but also being able to export power is now becomes a third pathway to reduce the amount of grid variability there is, because those networks outside are a little bit more stable.
Yeah.
I pushed back. I said Nigeria needs all the power it can get. So why are you selling power? But the sector expert said those people pay. How that seems a bit wrong, but you've got to be able to secure your assets and pay for your assets first before you start to give it into the Nigerian system that's a little bit infrequent with payments.
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge. And I think it's as much as we all love to have Ferraris and all of those things, if you can't afford it, then you don't get it. And so in Nigeria, similar case with the power sector, you have instances where customers are, bypass, all sort of vices going on, right? Even with some of the disco actors are complicit in this actions, complicit, I mean. And so the question is, if people are willing to pay for the energy, the investors, their primary concern is how do we earn the money to recover the investment? And so it's a fine balance. Obviously, as a regulator, there's a nationalistic element where we want to keep as much power as possible in Nigeria. But we're also not oblivious to the need of the investors to recoup their investments. And some of these transactions are governed by also bilateral, government to government relations. So it's a matter of, I don't think the international guys are depriving us of any energy that we're willing to pay for. So I think as long as if we continue to build capacity locally to pay for more energy, right, I'm confident that the capacity will be developed on the part of the gencos and transmission and distribution to meet the demand. I think, clearly we have about, 13,000 megawatts installed capacity. Operational day in, day out, it's more like 5,000. But I'm confident that if the guys were getting their money, people that have money, the only thing they like more than the money they have now is what they can make in the future. So I think if we create an enabling environment commercially for them, I don't think we need to worry about the fact that Nigeria is taking 200 megawatts or something. That's not going to be an issue.
That's a fair point. Why hasn't the grid gotten bigger? Because we were talking about this 13,000 capacity for forever.
So what do you mean a bigger grid? Do you mean like just having more transmission substations?
Yeah.
Having more lines? I mean, TCL will tell you they've gotten bigger, and they'll be right. A lot of investments have gone into transmission, but we are not. I think our concern shouldn't be about getting bigger. It's about growing the right way, right? Transmission historically has been one of these sectors where investment is not driven by the need of the customers, right? Ultimately, transmission exists as a super highway to get power from the generation stations to discos. Now, for that reason, transmission doesn't have any climate. They don't have autonomy on exactly where they invest. They have to ask their customers. because then they don't pay themselves, right? So you have instances where transmission contracts will be awarded to go and do a substation in a place. They'll do a 1 by 60 MVA transformer for a locality, and the peak demand of that locality ever is 5 megawatts.
But
so yeah, so we've gotten bigger, which is fine. We've gotten bigger, but we're going the wrong way, and that's why the commission, I'm sure you're aware, we sort of like try to discipline investment along the entire value chain, at transmission and distribution. So we have the performance improvement plan (PIPs), which are seeking to discipline investments and ensure that investments along the transmission and distribution segments are fully integrated, whereby you are sure that if TCN is investing in a line from point A to point B, there is clear commercially viable load for the disco at the terminal point of that network actually go and make money. Because otherwise, if you take energy to a place where the disco cannot make money, taking the energy there is not going to produce the money.
You've wasted.
It's basically a wasted investment. And so that's sort of the challenge. So I think the network is. I think my concern for the network now is actually no more about growing bigger. I think there's a lot of reinforcements required. We have a high amount of at-risk assets. So one of the great collapses of 2025 was that current transformer in one of the substations blew up, right? And that it was at a node where there were many generation plants connected, and that led to the grid collapsing. When we're asking, what is the age of this transformer? You're hearing something like 50 years old.
50,
yes. But in reality, some of these assets are built to last for a long time. But Nigeria is peculiar. When the transformer is being designed, it is not designed to be going fully off and fully on 5 or 6 times a year, right? So even though you might be 50 years old in your age,
but
your life is actually more like 80 years old, right? It's almost like so that's sort of like that's the challenge. So we have all of these assets that are at risk. So for me, I think the bigger focus of TCN and even the discos is we need to figure out where are the commercially viable points in the network, and if needed, we need to reinforce the network of those areas, because it's only when you have money from viable areas that you'll be able to access capital to develop the other areas. And I think that's one of the challenges of our privatization. I think we try to bite more than we could chew, right? In terms of develop everywhere. And it's understandable in a sense that unlike telecoms, Nigerians were used to power as a
social cost,
as a service that everybody, it was like a God-given right, which is true. But even within God-given, even in the US, there are places in the US today that the government is just doing fiber. Even though I'm sure New York has had fiber now for over, 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
So the thing is, development always has to be phased. If you try to bite more than you can chew, what happens is that you spend your little money, you do a little spending everywhere, and you have no impact.
So do you think privatization should have happened a different way? Or so more or less the options with privatization were do the way we did it, or do some pilot distribution companies first, or do all the discos and then have the government give the cheaper power from generation down to make the discos investable and all of that.
Yeah, so the thing is, honestly, I think all those models, I'm not sure that you were in the room where they've been explored. I know you were in the task force. All these models, the reason why they were considered is because they've worked somewhere else. Okay? So it means that there's no model that cannot work. But for any model to work, you need to have the enabling environment, right? You can't take the plant that is very good, in a wet environment, take it to desert and say, hey, you have to germinate. It's not going to work. And I think the challenge with our privatization experiment, I'll call it, is that actually, unfortunately, we've never truly created the environment to actually test it. So all of us are quick to say it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. Yes, that is true. It hasn't delivered the promises that were intended. But we've seen instances of renationalization. There was a particular disco where there was an issue. The core investor that won the bid returned it to the government. That disco right now is behind the curve of all other privatized discos. This is not to defend the guys that have privatized, but I think we always consider progress just based on our expectation at the beginning and what transpired. There's opportunity cost. When you do like a life comparison of what happened to the ones that you didn't do anything. Because someone told me, inaction is an action. Okay? So when you say, oh, this model, if you decide to go a particular model, then you have to consider and say, if I hadn't done anything, what had happened? So the reality is, I think because we have not really allowed the privatization framework to be tested, I think it has allowed a lot of lapses in terms of even the compliance and governance. right? And so, for example, between 2016 and 2019, there was a court case that prevented the government from reviewing tariffs. If privatization happened in 2013, okay, if you can go the first 6 years without ever really reviewing the rates, you effectively perpetuated the old mindset. So it's more difficult now to get anything like tariff reform done.
Mm-hmm.
If the government had come in 2013 and had been doing incremental, bridging the gap, the customers are attuned to the fact that this thing is not a stagnant pricing, right? We have a situation whereby from 2013 to 2019, more or less the prices were like the same. And if you look at the macro environment of Nigeria, nothing was priced the same. There's nothing that you paid 100 naira for in 2013 that you can pay the same 100 naira in 2019. Impossible. I think if I'm not mistaken, I think 2013 the dollar was 156. By 2019 we are 300 and something.
So
that's just even the most basic. That's not considered also inflation, right? So I think that stagnation in the rate making for those many years, I think unfortunately defeated one of the core tenets of the privatization in letting people understand that this is a commercial enterprise. And as people compare with telecoms, the benefit of telecoms is that the government company in telecoms, Intel, was basically like the last entrant to the market. MTN came, there was Econet, there was Glow, and they came and they were able to adjust their realities, customer expectation to like whatsoever to to match the commercially viable situation. So I think the power sector. So for me, I think if we want to really test this privatization, for me there are still some elements that are required both on the policy and regulatory side for us to create the, I would say, not even enabling environment now, just a level playing field, and then we'll see whether it works or not. So I think what would be a big disservice is for us to jettison what we've done now, and say, hey, you know what, we're going to do another thing, but we don't solve the fundamental environmental factors. If you do that, I'll be highly surprised if you get any different results.
That, and I think also when people look at the discos and say, "Oh, they're not well all run," you take a step back and you talk to folks who were in the system before at a very high level. They'll tell you that if we kept running the way we ran,
there'll be no power now.
There'll be no power, and government would literally be broke spending money on trying to shore up these distribution companies. So I see the point about inaction. Is an action if you just say
to do nothing. You're choosing to do nothing.
Yeah.
Right?
So
I mean, the discourse haven't been what's it called? I think obviously they haven't made the expectations, and I'm sure if you sort of like critically analyze it, you can find many shortcomings. And that's the job of us as regulators to ensure that, when we find those shortcomings, we do our best to, correct them. But I think the environment hasn't been helped by the overall, uncertainty in the macro environment. Because one investor told me, I said, okay, I took a loan in October 2013 to acquire 60%. The terms of the acquisition were listed. One of them was tariffs will be cost effective immediately. I'll be able to get some money for meters and so on and so forth. And then November 1st comes, and those promises are broken at day zero. Why will I go to the bank and raise more money? That makes a lot of sense. So I think, obviously regulators, somebody, economic man said, regulation is the act of learning to disappoint everybody equally. Right?
It's so interesting.
Yeah. So basically we do a lot of listening. So obviously we need to consider customers, very important. Without customers, there's no business. But also, if the environment is not favorable, without investors, as you rightly said, the system will just run aground.
And you don't have to answer this question, but I feel that sometimes the regulator doesn't carry the big stick, doesn't like beat people into submission. Whereas I feel like other regulatory agencies are very, very like harsh to solve problems and to put people in their place, both on the customer side and on the business side.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the considerations that happen in the room before we decide any action. They are very multifaceted, right? And obviously, I'm speaking in personal capacity here, not on behalf of the commission. And one thing I would say is, if you have any game and you set the rules, okay, if everybody is failing the game, the problem is not the players. The problem is the rules of the game.
Okay.
And so when people say, "Oh, NERC should drop the hammer on everybody," yes, We could, but the question is that like the worst NERC could do is to say, you know what, we'll revoke the license for this particular operator. But these are going concerns. If we revoke the license, it doesn't mean that the customers in the place should not get service. Okay? And investors read market signals. Okay? So when the question an investor will be asking is, did the regulator give you a fair chance? Yeah? If they did not give you a fair chance by penalizing you for not, but after still not giving you the fair chance, do you think you're going to get new investors to come into the business? Right? There are instances where discos were in 2022, a few discos were taken over by the banks due to acquisition loan and so on and so forth. And in some instances, we saw progress, but in some of the more problematic situations, fundamentally nothing changed. And so the thing is, it's not a matter of, at the end of the day, sometimes, it's not a matter of who is in charge. Some of the fundamentals have to be set right for the thing to have a chance. So I think as regulators, I mean, I'll give an example. I think there was this case, I think there was a time in 2017 or so, where the telecom regulator sanctioned one of the players a huge amount of money, right? I think I can't even compare the amount.
It was,
It was a lot of money. It
astronomical.
was a lot of money. But in reality, what was settled at the end was much lower. But I think it sent the signal. But in that case, it was easy for the regulator to sanction because other players had proven that what the regulator told that particular player to do
Doable.
was doable. Okay?
Interesting.
If NERC sort of like sets a rule, right? Obviously, we see that obviously everybody projecting the future. The future is based on trust. The reason why I'm talking to you is that I trust that you're going to respond to me. Okay? So the NERC setting regulations, we're expecting things to happen. For whatever reason, those things do not happen, and it affects the ability of our licensees to comply. If we now say, oh, we'll be dogmatic and still punish them, then what is the point?
Mm.
But I tell you, it's also the fact that sometimes we're not very loud in what we do. Recently, there was a disco on non-compliance with forum office decisions, as well as, I think, overbilling of customers. Over the course of like 6 months, they paid a fine over 500 million naira.
They paid a fine.
Yes.
The disco.
Yes, they did.
Why isn't this in the news? Why isn't it? Because I think it would help customers realize that
something has been done. I mean, the thing is, I think the commission historically has been media shy, and I think there's a good reason for that. Because even when you read our reports, right, things that we think are the most straightforward things, A is equal to B. Once the media grab it, all of a sudden now you're struggling and saying, "Oh, is this what we did? Is this us or somebody else? Is this the regulator of Ghana or something?" Like we're not sure what's happening. So the reality is, I think we've been a bit media shy. But at the end of the day, that's the thing. The regulator is not supposed to be seen a lot or heard a lot. Just do your work. Now, ultimately, there's an element that you really pointed to around the fact that in communicating some of your actions, you can instill or you can restore consumer confidence, right? And that's something that I think, you don't change your, your spot overnight. I think we're making more progress. I think if you check our social media and so on, there's more, visibility into our actions. And maybe it's something that we can, further improve. But at the end of the day, we don't measure our success on, is it publicly known that NERC fined a disco 500 million? That's not that's what we live for. We live for rules are set. If the rules are fair, sufficient number of customer operators will be able to scale them. The ones that fall below the line, then they face the music and they're dealt accordingly.
By the way, I know a really good team that can help you with your publication.
Okay, very good. I mean, we're open to we're open to proposals. Hopefully coming by financing as well.
So this was just supposed to be my opening, and we've gone for 30 minutes. So let's get into it. You left University of Cambridge. You did your PhD focused on the Nigerian power sector, and then you came back and you've had a really interesting journey. When we were leaving Cambridge, was the plan always to come back and work in the government sector, or did you have other things lined up?
Interesting. I mean, I think my journey to in the power sector actually starts from 2009, I think, when I was trying to get into university. So I think anyone that's good in the UK, you have to write something called a personal statement. That's basically like your pitch to enter university. And I was very clear that the reason why I was studying electrical engineering at the time was because Nigeria has had power problems. And so I was very keen on contributing my own quota to solving those problems. Ultimately, I finished my undergrad. Then I did a master's in nuclear energy.
In nuclear?
Yes.
So should Nigeria do nuclear?
We could, but like fundamentally, you have to get the commercials right. I mean, we can get to that discussion. I think there are peculiarities around, obviously, insecurity is a big issue because of the fissile material that is involved in nuclear. But actually, I've thought of different ways where you can locate the, what's it called? You can locate
Modular.
modular plants that are largely like offshore, so
Mhm.
you don't have to like go through the hinterland when you're transporting like material. It's been done. And the thing is, the interesting thing was that in the 50s, when nuclear energy was really on the, when there was a big push for it, the UK actually, part of their nuclear democracy, the diplomacy, was that they'll sell you their power plants, and then they'll manage the plant for you, and they're gonna come and take the used fuel, spent fuel off you, and go back and what's it called? Go back and reprocess it in the UK. So somewhere in the North Cumbria, so in North Cumbria in the UK, they have a big spent fuel reprocessing facility. So in Nigeria, I'm sure if you're able to structure and say, "Hey, I need help with this," I think it's something that can easily be structured. But back to my own journey. So I did that. Then I did my PhD, focused on the Nigerian power sector. But then I wasn't sure of the right opportunities to move back. So what happened was I went to consulting, management consulting. I joined McKinsey in the Lagos office. Did that for a couple years. But I was very eager to get involved in the power sector, right? So I was what's it called? I was a restless consultant looking for power sector opportunities, let's say. And then I left McKinsey for a bit to do some international policy consulting work. But then I was appointed to join the government of President Muhammad Buhari, may God rest his soul. And then as special assistant, and that was actually my first, I would say, period of extended engagement in the power sector. So during the time, that was when they set up the power sector working group, headed by His Excellency the Vice President Sibajo. And then so it was from there I got my teeth into it. Then I got very lucky to get into NERC. I was appointed as a commissioner by President Buhari. Obviously, there is a lot of good fortune involved. My principle is that no one deserves anything. So there's nothing that you do so well that no one is better than you. But opportunity is when you get lucky when the hard work is intercepted by good opportunity.
Yes.
Right. And so I joined the commission in 2022. And then in December of 2025, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu approved for me to be elevated to the position of vice chair. So I think it's a long journey. Obviously, it's when people if you read the story, it appears that it's very coordinated or anything.
Yeah.
In reality, it's a lot of chance. Like, I mean, when I was in Cambridge in 2017, if I had been told, write your own journey, I'm not sure I had the audacity to write such an accelerated journey in terms of my involvement with the highest levels of the power sector. But I thought I've been very lucky. So just that's what it is.
Um, one of a friend of mine and someone I consider a mentor said that the biggest problem with Nigeria is the fact that we lack confidence in a sense of on the international stage. We're very we're we're asking for permission to do things. But clearly from your journey, confidence is not your problem. So what gives you that ability to say, you know what, I want this and I'm going to go out and get it?
I mean, that's a tough question. That's probably the hardest question you asked me today because I don't know why. Some of the things are hardwired in your psyche, right? And I've just been lucky that I have committed to myself to something that I'm also reasonably competent at. Because if I committed myself to becoming a footballer, I'll probably be, somewhere in the streets now because I'm not sure I'm good enough, right? And so that's the challenge. So I think part of it is there's conviction. I think conviction is very important in terms of like everything you go after. You are very clear on what you're chasing. And I tell people, I always say, don't let life happen to you. Always strive, right? Someone said, if you shoot for the stars, you might land on the moon, right? If you don't try, anything is success. But if you try and you fail, you are more likely to land on the pedestal that's higher than where you started from. So I would say that, like, I've tried my best. And some of this is networking, right? I think in life, what is from my consulting is what I learned very early on is that progress in your career requires sponsors, right? And I've been very lucky in consulting. I had good sponsors. I was able to make good progress in my career. And when I joined the government in 2020, I would name drop Ahmad Zakari, right? He was clearly a very, very influential person in my journey because at the time he was secretary of the working group He was special advisor. So that's like 2 levels above me in the villa. But he really empowered me. I mean, at that age, 27, 28, I was acting as secretary at meetings with the vice president, CBN governor. So obviously some of it is competence, but it's just like also like platforms, right? So Ahmad really gave me the opportunity. And then from there, people noticed as well, right? And so you never know. You never know who's watching. I said that's another thing, right? So you never know who's watching. So always just bring your best everywhere you find yourself. And then just know that you cannot guarantee outcomes. But you can definitely guarantee the input, which is the effort. And once you do that, just pray you get lucky. And then good things will happen.
Interesting. Um, Going to just on the market front, right? As far as how the sector's set up, you've been at NERC. I remember sitting in the room with, I'll give these guys a shout out: Umar Hashidu, Chibweze Eke, Brian David West, and myself. We were talking to Commissioner Aisha on the new service-based tariff model that was now we're going with. And there was conversations around how do you monitor to ensure that the commission has the data to be able to work with the discos and be able to monitor performance. That whole process for the commission really changed how the power sector became pretty much cost reflective overnight, in a sense of the band A tariffs really enforced a path to help the commission go through that. And I think without the technology of being able to visibly see, you can then see you're getting 20 hours. Therefore, given our model, you deserve to pay more. So my question is really around the technology of ensuring all of this is happening. Is that still taking place? Is that still a way you guys are monitoring how discos are performing? And that innovative process to now literally leave tariffs out of the hands of the commission and set off to the distribution companies. How has that process been since the commission is no longer worried about what disco should be charging for power?
Um, we're still worried about it. We get all the complaints, so I wouldn't say we're not worried about it. But I think the sort of like important thing is technology is critical, right? It is the I don't know. It is a critical enabler in attaining your objectives. As rightly said, the SBT was birthed, I think, in 2019, 2020, right? And one of the big things was people are going to say, hey, how do I know I'm getting the service? And I think, now shout out to next year. I think you were one of the big advocates for seeing how we could get technology incorporated into the process very quickly, right? And I remember the dashboard, I think Kenneth and so on, that was like, I would say that was the V1 of like how we track
Tracking.
service delivery compliance. Right now, we've migrated, catching up with new technology, as you say. So we now have IoT meters that are installed on all the 11 and 33 kV feeders. And those IoT meters, they actually stream data, I think is every minute or every 15 seconds. I'm not sure where we finally landed. And so what that gives us is that we're able to, at least at the feeder level, evaluate service delivery compliance by the discos. Now I must note that obviously I don't get my power from a feeder. I get my power from a DT. Between a DT and a feeder, many things can go wrong. So many times customers say, hey, I'm not getting 20 hours. But when we go and check the feeder, we actually 20 hours been delivered. So that's an issue. That's another issue entirely. But I think I'm aware that through the different metering initiatives, both by the PMI, under the Office of the SA Energy, and the Ministry of Power, and the World Bank DISREP, there are efforts being taken to install smart meters on all the DTs. I think about 120,000. So it's a large project. Once that is done, what we're able to do now at the feeder level, we're able to do it at the DT level. So when you actually say, I'm not getting service now, then we're in a better position to say, that is true or that is not true. But, we've sort of started that. All the band A feeders, 1,000 of them, as the time when we did the transition, have IoT meters installed. Right now, by the end of this year, the target is to have all feeders. So from band A to band E. So I think right now in the country, we have about 3,900 feeders. and there's ongoing procurement by the discos to ensure that all feeders have these IoT meters in place, and we can track service delivery. I think it's been useful for us actually as a commission, in addition to being able to talk to customers and engage, but also from a sanction and enforcement perspective. On a monthly basis, if you check our tariff orders that we issue to the discos, we have a section for upgrade feeders and downgrade feeders. Okay, people don't always see the downgrade. Nigerians are selective vision. So the downgrade feeders, anytime I think we analyze data on a rolling 30-day basis. If a particular feeder has failed to achieve 600 hours, because in a simple 30-day month, 600 hours will do the job.
Mhm.
So I think if it's below 18 hours per day on average, you've been downgraded to the service level that was delivered. So it could be band B, band C for the subsequent month. Or if it is within 18 hours and 20 hours, instead of downgrading, we just give them there's a penalty that they have to give tokens to the customer to compensate.
Is that actually happening?
It's happening. But the thing is, we're also trying to retool our mechanism for delivery of those tokens of the compensation. Right now, I think you largely get it if you go and vend, you get extra tokens. So if you pay for 1,000, you might get 1,005 or 2,000 to reflect the additional for the compensation. But what we're looking to do, considering one of the options we're considering is there a world where these compensation tokens, as well as even the map, the meter, map, customers are refunded.
Mm-hmm.
If you can automate the system whereby on a monthly basis, customers just get the tokens in their emails. So that way, it doesn't depend on you vending.
So
there's no proactive step required by the customer to actually derive the benefit. So we continue to use technology to try to improve the our regulatory efficacy and also the operations of the utilities. Because at the end of the day, we exist to create the right environment for the utilities to succeed. If the discos are doing well commercially and service level basis, then we're happy. So that's sort of like the way we see it. So technology has been useful for us on this compliance for SBT, and obviously our states are taking over now. I won't be surprised to see states come up with a different methodology for tariff determination, and that's fine. We are happy to. Ultimately, we will sort of like retreat to just issuing tariffs for the wholesale market, so generation and transmission, and we'll allow the states to do whatever they deem best for their local circumstances.
So I want to get into the state market, but I want to stay on this technology IoT conversation because that yields to smart meters as the panacea to be able to really tie all this together. And a few years ago, for I've forgotten the metering program, the one
National Mass Metering Program.
Yeah, phase 0.
Sure. Yeah.
We're moving into smart ready meters, but now there's really a push. Oh, well, I guess the question is there really a push to get all the discos to do smart meters? One, and then what's the platform, the AMI platform that needs to be used? Because from what I understand, most discos don't have a function AMI. So it kind of seems a waste if you have a smart meter that you don't have a way to report that data back in.
Okay, I think good point. So on that, just by way of update, as I'd say. So under the disrupt, one of the things that disrupt was very big on is that in addition to buying meters, they are buying MTMS systems, meter data management systems. So all the discos, part of your phase 1 of the meter procurement under disrupt, I think about $250 million, is that you have to get the MDMS. Because as you rightly said, there's no point of having smart systems if you have no system to decode it, right? Now, in terms, as you said, we also have a lot of smart ready meters on the walls. I think historically, the discos have struggled with the secure what's it called, SIM cards. Also with the commercials of agreeing the telecoms companies on how to charge for the data, the megabytes and so on that will be used. But one of the big pushes is that the discos are beginning to also get a better appreciation of the fact that, for example, instead of you sending people on the field to be tracking energy theft, if you actually had like smart meters that were streaming data, you can put in automatic protocols in the system for it to flag abnormal anytime there's a substantial change in the customer's spending and consumption history. So I think, obviously, as the market moves towards cost effectivity, the cost on the part of the disco of inefficiency becomes clearer, right? Right now, we're not at cost effectivity by any means yet. I think as at the last tariff order that was issued by the Commission, the weighted average cost effective tariff in the country is about 185 to 190 kilowatt naira per kilowatt hour. And the average allowed tariff today is about 124. So
124.
124.
Okay.
So we were very close in January of 2023. But once there was a reset of the macroeconomic parameters, the dollar went to where it went and so on. We have been playing catch up to balance with that. But I think once the subsidy in the market becomes clearer and discos are forced to recover the revenue, the advantage of technology for them in terms of being able to help them secure the revenue is only going to become clearer, and they'll do the right thing. On our own part, under the district as well, one of the things that we've done now is that we've mandated a reprogramming of the disco PIPs. Historically, what you've had is that if a disco should get $10 million from the World Bank, okay, they'll buy, I don't know, 5,000 transformers, X number of lines, and so on. But what they would not do is actually to concentrate all of those investments in one place. So they will do transformer for Guarimpa, they will do the line in Katampe, they will do substation in Lugbe. Now, the reality is this system is only as strong as its weakest point. So if you go and put a brand new transformer connected to an old line that cannot carry capacity, the entire network in that area can only carry what the line can carry. The transformer is going to automatically make the line fantastic. So what we've done now is that we're moving towards a feeder-based TIP implementation, whereby we want to create centers of excellence. So if you say I'm taking money to go and improve my disco, don't improve your disco yet. Improve a particular segment of your disco.
Network, yeah.
So that we are sure that if you say you're facing Katampe now, we're sure that Katampe becomes like a gold standard. So that all the transformers, all the lines, customer metering, and so on for the Katampe area are fully done. So I think that's something that is also, going to be very revolutionary in terms of how the sector improves. Because if you don't go that approach and continue to just throw your little money, because the money that we're getting now compared to the investment needs just a drop in the water. If you now split that little drop in so many places, you actually struggle to see the impact in anywhere.
The disco space is interesting, right? Because, like, for instance, AADC, to your point, has 4 states, but Niger is a big 3 states in one.
Actually, 4 and FCT.
FCT, right?
Nasarawa,
Kogi,
Niger. Okay, that's it.
3, yeah. But Niger is probably one of the biggest states in the country, right? So
it is the biggest.
So the thought around dropping different investments all over the place doesn't make sense. So that's a really good approach. Now, will you mandate? I guess your point is you won't mandate discos to have smart meters. You'll just, once things become cost reflective, the cost of deploying assets,
the opportunity cost of not being
they
smart,
will have to figure out it themselves.
Actually, we are also compelling them to have smart meters. So there are minimum standards to meters that have been deployed. Okay, so for the cities and towns and so on, the minimum standard is that you must have a smart meter. Right now, the only challenge has been that those meters are smart on the wall, but you don't have the SIM cards in them and data services paid for to actually operationalize the smartness. Okay, but that's the discussion I think discussions are having with the telecoms to figure out how do we get those SIMs. Obviously, every SIM requires an NIN now, so there are some regulatory things, but also the cost. Discos are a bit tight for cash, so they're trying to figure out what is the best way to finance that. So I think from a standard point, there is a minimum standard of like smart meters for industrial, for commercially viable customers. The challenge is that for customers that are not consuming a lot of energy, a smart meter today, I think a single phase meter costs, I don't know, anything from like 120 to 150,000. A disco asks itself, if you go to my village, I meet my grandfather that has one ball, is that an economic case for you to go and give that man 100,000 naira meter? All of his vending for the next 5 years, might not be 1,000. So how do you justify putting the investment in its place? So right now, discussions that are being had are, can we go with a multi-tier approach even in the metering? We don't have to deploy the same thing for everybody. Customers that are viable, there's a
threshold of expense,
to sort of like ensure that the energy has been accounted properly. Let's use the gold standard. For the other ones, meter for me, right? It serves primarily 2 purposes. One purpose is for the customer side is an instrument of trust, right? I want to just like when you go to the filling station. The reason why you sometimes some people they have to call you and say, "Oh God, look at the meter, look at the pump," is that you are confident that once they put the thing, it starts from zero, and it will stop at the number after your what's it called after your tank is full, right? So it's an instrument of trust. So for most customers, I think what they see it for is just I just don't have a meter so that when I'm consuming, I don't need to fight with ADC or with BDC or whatever. I know that what they're billing me or what they've deducted from me is what I've used. So that's one thing. On the disco side, though, is an instrument of revenue protection, and that's where you need smart. So I look at it that areas where security is very important, and there's a ability to pay is there. There's a justification for you to use smart meters, gold standard meters. In areas where meters are just being used for you to bridge the trust deficit between the disco and the customer, and you know that they are not going to consume a lot of energy, it's better for you just to use the cheap stuff. Because even from a regulatory standpoint of prudence, use and useful, it will be difficult for you to justify to a regulator where you're giving a customer that vends 100,000 a year a 130,000 naira meter. It's because otherwise, what you're doing is that you overload on that customer, and it makes not me, you and your rich friends to pay the balance. So that's the challenge.
So why won't is there conversations for NERC to put the AMI like a SaaS monthly cost into the tariff modeling for discos, because discos have a huge challenge in getting that sorted.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether you are using this platform to market consultancy for the discos. Obviously, we are very clear on the OPEX provision of the discos. It's a very transparent model. If there's any cost that they're about to incur that is outside of the model, that is proven, to be useful, then the rates would have to adjust to accommodate it. But now we are confident that the OPEX we're given is sufficient to cover this, data cost. So if they have any evidence to the contrary, they can always file.
So it becomes your choice to figure out where to place the
prioritization. You have to prioritize. Do you pay X amount for more vehicles to go and buy Hiluxes and so on, or you pay that money to a network provider for them to give you visibility to your customers remotely? It's all about its choices.
Interesting. All right, so there's been this whole controversy around state markets that NERC is holding discos hostage and states hostage. You don't want them to go. All sorts of negative press. Knowing the commissioners that I know at NERC and knowing the work you guys do, that's not your goal from everything that I've deduced. There's now a further conversation that there's an amendment to the act that's in Senate, and what we're hearing is NERC will still have oversight if it passes of the state regulatory agencies. And there are two schools of thoughts there. NERC shouldn't be involved in the state markets, but then from an international best practices point of view, even in other mature markets, you have a federal agency, but you also have state agencies. And the federal agency has oversight on what's going on. Is that where you would like to see us head? Or do you think a different model of where we're going is what we should be doing?
I think, I'm no lawyer, so don't quote me. But I think issues of jurisdiction are very clear. Okay? A state regulator is not answerable to NERC. Can never be. I will never be. Okay? I think if I'm not mistaken, in the US, we had a similar case where I think the regulator in Texas allowed the operators in Texas to operate their grid without the best level of winter protection, right? Saying that, we never have like harsh winters in Texas. But I think 2 years ago or so, 3 years ago now, there was an almighty winter.
Wiped out
everything, right? So in the US, for example, FERC, which is the federal regulator, could not have told the Texas regulator what to do. Okay? The issues of jurisdiction are very clear. However, we operate a very interconnected system. Okay? And as a result, even though everybody is within their territory from a governance standpoint, there's a need for severe collaboration between the regulators. Because, for example, now the entire wholesale market of Nigeria is interstate. There's no intrastate wholesale market at the moment. all the wholesale energy enters commingles with the national grid.
Mm-hmm.
And anything on national grid is solely within the regulatory purview of NERC.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when customers are being invoiced, the CERC is not going to determine the tariff only based on what the distribution company needs. It's going to determine and say, okay, the distribution company bought energy from Azura, from Kanji, Jeba, all of these guys. That one, NERC decides. The NERC regulates the price and so on of that transaction. Transmission also is a NERC approved
Mm-hmm.
tariff and expenditure. So I think all we've been yearning for, which I think unfortunately was misconstrued at some point early on in the process, but I think now we are over it, is that we're yearning to have a very clear collaborative framework, respecting everybody's territory, but noting that just like I mentioned earlier about transformers and so on, if one of the segments breaks, the entire thing suffers. If NERC does a bad job of transmission regulation, the states have no power, distribution companies have no power to sell. If NERC does everything well on the upstream and something is wrong at the discos, our gencos and transmission that we are regulating have no off-takers for their product. So I think initially there was a lot of suspicion at part of the commission. They were not willing to let the states go. But I think, the best test of anything is actually what you do. And so far, 16 states, I think, the most recent one was Gombe, have written to the commission, passing their laws. And now we are so automated with technology that the day you write, the next day you get your letter saying that the
You're
countdown
good.
has started, you're good to go. Obviously, the law provides for 6 months transition period, during which time the regulatory oversight still belongs to NERC, but that's giving the state the time to go and set up and their own structures. And as a commission, in fact, yesterday we started discussions around how do we extend a hand of friendship or collaboration to the states. Because we know that NERC is 20 years old and NERC is far from perfect. Obviously, it shouldn't take the states 20 years to reach where NERC is today, but it's also not possible to expect them to wake up today and then tomorrow they are,
And
at NERC
running.
level.
Yeah, no.
It's a matter of a lot of, you can check the records, almost at least 4 or 5 I can think of,
That's
where
staff.
the
Yeah.
ex-staff of NERC and
Yeah.
the bosses there.
Yeah.
So obviously, there is no substitute for real time on the field experience. So for us, the way we see it is we're actually eager to have the full transition to the States with a sunset date. The reason for that is right now we are operating a hybrid system that's a bit complicated. So in AEDC now, Kogi has gone. Okay. Niger has gone. Okay. So when it comes to issuing tariffs to customers, that is done by the respective CERCs. But Nasarawa hasn't gone yet. Okay. So NERC, what we're doing our rate review and calculations now, we have to exclude some people for the bottom part and then, so it's very messy. So since the plurality of states have gone from population standpoint, we're actually eager for the law to provide a clear sunset date so that all states can go, but we can transition properly into this multi-tier system.
But all states shouldn't go. There's states that are not viable. There's states that know that they don't have a pathway.
Well, that is not for us to decide. We'll allow the governors and the legislation of the states to figure out. But I think we just want people that are keen to go. We would like it to happen all at once, so that then we can really transition into this two-tier arrangement. They regulate distribution and supply. We continue to do generation and transmission, and we then have a very clear mechanism for collaboration to ensure that there's no break in the chain.
The work should be done at the state level, right? Because I think there's some local context that makes information and makes regulation a little bit easier, but it doesn't quite make sense to also have new people who would show up, huge learning curve, and you're not able to get things done because they're still new on the job. So I think there's a pathway to really talk about both sides of the house. One thing we've thought about is a lot of states are going to use this as a political tool, right? But then it changes.
I can neither confirm nor deny that.
but it also changes the game because Abia, for instance, is a state that everybody's saying, "Oh my goodness, it's incredible X, Y, and Z." But we all know that the only reason Abia is doing what it's doing is because of the journey, the fight that Prof. Naji went through 10, 15 years ago to secure geometric. Without geometric, Abia would still be in the same place as everybody else. So it's not, to me, it's not a really good
Yeah,
use
and
case.
the thing is, you can only learn by doing, right?
Yeah,
And so a state that has gone through a more rigorous process in this whole electrician journey is better suited. It has a head start compared to other states. But I think that collaboration is going to be essential.
precisely.
And we have created a forum now. It's called the Forum of Electricity Regulators in Nigeria. Hopefully, we're going to get the charter and all of that sorted by end of Q1. So that's supposed to be our channel where we really want to ensure that there's regulatory certainty. Because the whole intention of this change in the law was not to torpedo the entire thing, right? There are investors that are currently dependent on there are businesses that are developed around the existing regulatory frameworks. So it's going to be important to ensure that the transition is not too abrupt, so that even when you transition from being NERC regulated to being CERC regulated, there's sufficient consistency, and then you can then evolve your business plans and environment to match up with the regulatory vision of your new regulator.
Mhm. So one of the projects we're doing now is around using smart meters in one of the sub goes to really look at how to make the network smart and put smart meters in the network. We talked to the stakeco or the subco around how many customers they had in the cluster. They said we have 500. So the program, the UKNIF program, procure the 500 meters through FCDO, brought it to site, started putting up meters. 2 days later, they now do proper enumeration, and guess what? They have almost 1,000 customers. So the point around meters has already been made. That's important. But the other points around enumeration, lack of data in the sector. I don't think any disco has fully done enumeration. Isn't that the baseline of everything you do to set rates, to set all the things that's around admiration? Why is that still a place discos are still dancing around and not doing what they're supposed to do, in my opinion?
Yeah, well, like I said on the board that you interviewed the MD of AEDC,
I did.
I think he's probably better placed to speak to why they're not doing the right thing. But as you rightly said, it's a no-brainer as to the fact that you need to enumerate. If you don't know the customers that are drawing power from you, how do you then know when there are abnormalities in terms of energy consumption? But I think under the World Bank program, DISREP, one of the things they're focusing on is also, so there's a system called the GIS, Geographic Information System, that is being deployed by all the discos. And one of the key things from that is also there's going to be an asset mapping. So you want to map, they want to be able to, if you put my meter number on the GIS, they want to get to a position whereby you can see where is the DT that's feeding me, where is the LT cable that I'm getting power from, all the way to the 3 substation. So I think hopefully that would support, what's it called? That would support the disco's enumeration efforts. I think some of these things are very glaring. But as I say, right now, with this subsidy arrangement that we have, a disco can have a DRO, that's the remittance obligation to embed, of 40%. So you can get a bit lazy. If you focus on a few big customers, yeah, that's enough money to cover. But I think as the market moves towards more cost effectivity, you can definitely expect that the what's it called? The veil will be lifted from the face of the discos, and they realize that some of these basic things that have been emphasized over and over again will become essential to your survival commercially.
Speaking of embed, last week they went through this process in Lagos to sign the agreement with a few different parties around raising a bond. For me, that showed investor confidence in the sector. Was that the same signal the regulator got?
I think the bond is actually more of a reflection of confidence in the government because the bond is raised on the back of the credibility of the federal government of Nigeria. So all the investors are seeking is that will the government be able to pay my bond when the yields are due? And I think yes, I think Nigeria, generally speaking, the government has a good track record. However, I think for investor confidence in the power sector, what is going to be required is actually not only curing legacy debts, is how do you prevent accumulation of future debts? And that's a challenge, right? You have a system, as I said, mentioned earlier, the DRO on average of the disco is about 40%. What that means in reality is that every 100 naira invoice that MBET receives from the Gencos, the discos are only expected to pay 40 naira. Government must pay 60 naira. The track record over the last couple years is that the government is not particularly able to raise that cash in real time and just pay those bills. Now, for an investor in generation, what they'll be looking at is not the fact that you paid a bond. So you raise the bond to pay the guys that started owing you from 2015. What they're going to be asking is that, are we clear that if we come in today, there's a mechanism from the market or from the government to ensure that we get paid going forward? So I think kudos to the government for closing out on the bond. I think I think that's the first time it's been done in the past sector, and I think it's the first tranche.
300.
I think 300 billion cash, 290 billion bond to be given to the Gencos. I think the entire bond program is 4 trillion naira, which will go a long way covering the historical debt. But I think, we have to very quickly celebrate the victories. We have to very quickly get, look forward, because investments will only come where there's certainty of recovery.
And that's cost reflected tariff.
Yes, that's part of the solution.
Yeah.
But I think subsidy is also allowed. I think it's important to note that subsidy is not a taboo in electricity.
It's everywhere in the world.
Taboo is subsidy that's going to the wrong people and subsidy that you don't have money to cover. So I think such tariffs will help the government put the subsidy, hopefully, within a financing envelope that's affordable, where they can pay real time. Not like you have to raise a bond retroactively. You pay real time. And I think more importantly, let the people that need the subsidy get it. People like you should not be getting Band D service. That is not good for Nigeria.
I should be at what, like Band E?
Well, I think it should be A+. A+.
All right. So to close out, a few years ago, NERC mandated that all discos have embedded generation, and a percentage of that is on renewable energy. 5% of that as well. In the next 5 years, as we wrap up, where do you see the market going to as far as size, scale, and the structure? And do you think discos will actually do this very cumbersome task?
Interestingly, I think in 5 years' time, NERC will not be able to answer any question about discos. So I actually don't know where it's headed in that sense. I think the SERC will be responsible. I think, obviously, the embedded generation was renewable energy component of it was in the Commission's effort to implement the government's policy on renewable energy coming into the grid. I think, obviously, now with the change in the market, the landscape, we would focus our energy, our own efforts. We'll focus our activities, let's say, on ensuring that there's renewable energy at the grid level, right? And one of the key components of that is having SCADA, grid reliability, because obviously intermittency, you need a more robust grid to be able to deliver that. I think at the state level, embedded generation will pick up a little bit, I expect, primarily because, it's now clear to everybody that the grid you're not going to be able to stretch the grid in terms of, generation. So there's some value in how can we do generation at the point of need, right? Another thing that I think will help embedded generation is the gas infrastructure framework, infrastructure development plan of the government. So once you have more gas spread all over the country, then the raw material is there. So it's much easier to co-locate a thermal power plant with a gas supply system. And I think also as solar and so on gets cheaper, then you're able to potentially do solar, which is relatively cheap without batteries. And you are confident that the entire network itself will be able to provide the reference to ensure that, you can integrate the solar into the network.
Interesting. There's so many other angles to this conversation, but we'll leave it here. Thank you so much, Vice Chair, for coming, and we'll look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Awesome.